Welcome to Alchemist X, Innovators Inside, the official podcast of Alchemist X, the corporate services division of the Alchemist Accelerator. Alchemist X operates corporate programs for spin-ins and spin-outs. Here on AXII, you'll follow host Rachel Chalmers, head of Alchemist X, as she talks to corporate innovation's highest achievers and most compelling thought leaders. These are fly-on-the-wall conversations with leading practitioners in the field. They'll share their lessons learned so that you can accelerate your development. So sit back, relax, and get ready to level up.
Today, I'm so pleased to welcome Jesper Frederiksen. I first met Jesper when he was president of research and development for Danaher, which is one of those huge companies that not many people have heard of. Danaher is a diversified conglomerate headquartered in Washington, D.C. Since then, Jesper has served as chief innovation officer at Banfield Pet Hospital, a Mars company, and then at Mars Veterinary Healthcare itself. Most recently, he's become a VP and digital executive for Velux, a Danish manufacturing company that makes windows and skylights. Jesper attended INSEAD and the Syed School of Business at the University of Oxford. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure. Yes, but you've led so many large manufacturing organizations through this turbulent period of digital transformation. How did you come to be involved in this work? What drew you to it in the first place?
Well, I think as a digital or technologist, if you will, fueled with a lot of passion and curiosity, it wasn't that hard to get into this piece. I mean, I started out, very traditionally in the IT space and IT and technology space. And then, I was with one of the companies I was with, one of the Danaher companies called Gilbarco Veeder-Root. We started to get into the realms of IoT, and we're talking, 7 years back. And that really triggered my interest to get deeper into the R&D piece and to be part of how you develop products, how you utilize data and digital to understand how your customers or users of your products, how they actually work with your product for a couple of reasons. One is to understand whether and how and where you can improve your products. And the second piece is to also understand what opportunities there are to enhance your product. And you could also say there are also opportunities that suddenly arise to the point of, are there additional opportunities to monetize or to provide more services to your customers using the information that you get out of your products? So I would say this balance between being super passionate and being curious have sort of led me into, all kinds of different industries and different businesses that I've worked with over the years. So I guess that's probably my magic formula in this. And I mean, people might say, well, is that really it? And I would say, yes, it's a simple, and very human piece here called curiosity and the, willingness or the desire to learn and to educate yourself. And that brought me to, a ton of different companies, different people, and constantly sort of sparked my interest in just getting to know more.
What steps do you go through when you come into a Mars or a Velux? How do you break down the steps involved in structuring corporate innovation in these huge companies?
It's a great question, but I think I'm not sure if there's one single formula to it, but the first part of my sort of discovery is listening. What's the appetite? What's the boldness? What's the willingness to dive into uncharted territories? What is what I call the digital maturity of the company? Because that sort of assessment, if you will, helps me navigate and also assess how quickly we should move and where to move and exactly what technology stack or what level of ambition to build up. So for me, that initial testing and feeling, and I mean feeling, gut feeling as well, it's not a scientific formula that I have. It's trying to understand where are the mindsets, where are sort of the, like I said before, ambition levels, what industry, what market are we in, what are the opportunities, and what are our capabilities. So really, I'm trying to gather a lot of different information in a relatively short time to sort of distill and to test my hypothesis and to get going.
It sounds like it's really an internal process of customer discovery.
Yeah, you could say that. It's obviously I utilize wherever it's possible, external perspectives or inputs and what have you, but it is mostly an internal process, and it's something that goes relatively quick. I would say it's not a year-long study of where and how and who and all these kinds of things. I feel that you can almost take this temperature pretty quick and diagnose how quickly you should move and where you should move. That's kind of how I see it.
Were there big differences between Danaher and Mars and now Velux in terms of their digital maturity and their appetite for innovation?
Well, it's three very, very different companies. Velux is obviously based in Denmark, over in Europe. We can talk about the differences between US-based companies and European-based companies in a second. But really, if I take the step back and look at the major differences, Danaher as a publicly traded company compared to the two other ones, so Mars and Velux are family-owned, there is a different sort of level of transparency needed into your investments and into your roadmaps and strategies and these kinds of things. I tend to say that in a company like Danaher and maybe other publicly traded companies, there is a higher focus on quick return or quick output or tangible results, if you will, that can then be utilized in one way or the other, compared to both Mars and Velux that are both family-owned businesses where the perspectives typically are longer sighted. The ambition level may be the same or maybe even more passionate or even more short-term driven, but family-owned businesses are typically in for the long run, right? So what I've discovered is that you typically have a little bit longer leeway in terms of how and where you want to go. But having said that, that does not really change my strategy as to how quickly you should move or where you should focus and what you should expect from an outcome perspective. But again, it is not just different types of companies, it's also different industries. Danaher being basically an industrial conglomerate and Mars being a mix of different kinds of industries. Obviously, there's the chocolate we all know, but there is also a fairly large part of Mars that is focused on pet nutrition and pet care. There's the veterinary hospitals, and there are technology companies within that space, and there are also other branches of Mars. So it's really spread across different industries and sectors. And then looking at Velux that I'm helping right now, that is a single pillar kind of industry in the construction industry, if you will, producing windows with sort of a single product, more or less. Of course, there are accessories and things that goes onto your windows or part of your windows, but it's three very, very different settings to work in. Like I said, that has an impact as to how I diagnose and how I put a strategy or game plan together. But the level of ambition, the passion needed, and the investment needed is kind of the same no matter where you are.
Yeah, I really, your comments about the difference between European privately held companies and American publicly traded companies really resonates with me. As ambitious as they would like to be, an American publicly traded company really is somewhat chained to those quarterly analyst calls and to having to demonstrate results within 90 days, which puts quite a lot of constraints on what their R&D can achieve. Whereas family-owned companies, which you find a lot of them in Europe, really can afford to think in terms of 20, 50, 100-year bets.
That is true. However, I mean, there are goods and bads, if you will, so pros and cons to both, because I personally actually like sort of the short-term focus on tangible outcomes, like you mentioned, publicly traded companies usually have, because what I've also discovered is that family-owned businesses, and of course, maybe only those that I've been experienced to or seen or worked with, there might be a little slowness, because you have a longer leeway, you're in for the long run. So you may not be as pressured, if you will, to deliver something, but it does not take away that you still have competitors, you still have a market, you still have customers that are expecting kind of the same level of innovation and the same experience, no matter whether you're publicly traded or a family-owned business. We all, as consumers, do have expectations to the products and the services that we buy. We have all been schooled in the recent years as to, from Amazon and others as to what you can expect when dealing with a services-based company or a products-based companies. So our expectations, again, as consumers of services or products are sky high, and is not really differentiating between the origins use of that service, from a company construction perspective.
Yeah, a little tangentially, I think this is what really appeals to me about the accelerator format is that you have the ambition of a moonshot, but you're placing this more or less arbitrary time limit around it and saying, let's get as much as we possibly can done by this date that we've chosen out of the air. But that deadline pressure really does concentrate the mind wonderfully.
That is true.
Yes, but when you look back on all of this work you've done in innovation, what are you proudest of?
There's not one single thing, but there is a repeating point of proudness, if you can say that comes to my mind when I see the ignition or the realization in people's eyes as to, holy smokes, is this possible with technology? I mean, the moment when I can see, I don't know, the coin flips or this bit of understanding that suddenly is there when people connect the dots, when I have sort of facilitated a situation or a moment or provided a piece of knowledge that is helping people take that next step. That to me is super satisfying and something that makes me proud, because that is where I have enabled a person, a project, or a team to maybe even run on their own with a piece of innovation, so to speak.
I know exactly what you mean. I don't think I've ever heard anyone articulate it quite that well before, but that moment when we as corporate innovators have created a space for people to really grasp the possibility is the most rewarding part of this work for me as well. I think it probably is for all of us.
It is. I mean, I can't help thinking I used to be a teacher way back when. It's sort of the same moment and it's the same experience, when you stand in front of a class and you see they start realizing and understand a formula or a bit of knowledge or information or, again, connecting the dots. You see that in people's eyes, and that's just wonderful. No matter if it's kids, if it's grown-ups, it's a big corporate setting or whatever it is, that makes me fly.
Yeah, exactly. I had started out to be an English professor and my children laugh at me and say, when do you ever use your degree? And I'm like, every single day. Everything I do is about storytelling and about connecting the dots. Tell that to kids today and they don't believe you.
No.
If you had one do-over, if you got a mulligan and you got to replay a scenario from your career, what would you do?
People have asked me that question before, and it's hard for me because to point at something specific, because I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. So all the so-called failures that I've made, I've used those to learn something, right? That's brought me to a next level. So I really wouldn't be without those learnings or failures, if you will, or things that I could have done differently. But what bothers me sometimes is if I do something that I know I have done correctly before, or basically repeating an error. That to me is not super nice, if you know what I mean. And I have unfortunately done that a few times. But again, there is a learning with that, right? There is something that comes out of that. And so I would say if you put me under pressure on this one, I would probably say that when I have not allowed people to sort of process information or get into a call it a safe space, I have allowed them to take the time they need or the time a project needed or a group of people needed to get by themselves to the next level. That can bother me, once in a while, and that has happened in a few times. That's then I've said to me, oh damn, I did this, or I've seen this before. Why repeating this? And then on the contrary, saying, well, maybe there's something for me to learn here. There is a reason for this happening again. And then honestly, I've then discussed that with the teams and the people that I've been with. As hey guys, I've been into this before, and it's kind of unfortunate that we are here, but there's something for us to learn here. So as long as you take your, call it discoveries, I wouldn't call it failures, but discoveries from that point, there's always a piece of learning in what you're doing, and there is always a reason behind things happening, or you reacting, or you responding in a way you do, right?
That is profound, because as people drawn to innovation, we are sky high in curiosity and openness to new things, but we're also in a position of arbitrage where we're bringing information to people who aren't quite as sky high on curiosity and innovation. And so having that patience, creating that safe space, as you say, is key to success, and yet it goes against our temperament. It's a really challenging balance to try and achieve.
It is, and there are a couple of, call it, sayings that I typically throw around me when I'm in these innovation settings. One is that let's not let perfect get in the way of better, and that it sounds so simple, but yet we often tend to over-engineer solutions or look for the perfect rather than the next increment. That can be somewhat of a showstopper in many cases. I guess you've been in those situations as well, where you've built up expectations, you want to deliver the right solution, all these kinds of things. And I very often have to pull back teams that, hey guys, let's focus on what we can deliver in 2 weeks or next week, instead of having, way too long roadmaps or delivery plans or milestones or what have you. Because, if you look at this year has shown us that we can't really expect or predict anything anyways, right? So I think this year, by all means, have shown us that let's not plan too far out, because things change rapidly and it's not going to stop. I think we have all learned something about our ability to change, our ability to make decisions, and our ability to stay bold in what we do. So that perfect/better thing is something that I use quite often. The same goes with, people say fail fast to learn. But to me, it's not really a question of failing fast. To me, it's a question of learning quickly, right? There is a sort of a negative tone of failing, whereas there's a more positive tone or optimistic tone about learning. We talked about mindsets before. That's part of the mindset change that I go into organizations with. That is this, let's stay optimistic. Let's focus on the short-term wins, because that in the end will bring us to some really leapfrogging kinds of innovations down the line. But let's not aim for that specifically now, but let's aim for what we know, what we can move in a relatively quick manner.
Yeah, I like Samuel Beckett's formulation: fail again, fail better. Back to your point about not making the same mistakes over and over, but at least learning from them if you do, and taking that data away.
So true.
We've preempted my next question a little bit, but what do you think makes corporate innovation so difficult?
Probably a multitude of things. The word itself, that sort of, puts some pictures in your mind, at least in my mind, about some heavy processes, some bureaucracy that may prevent innovation or fast movements from happening. And I guess that's also part of the reason why some corporations are sort of isolating or separating their innovation to specific hubs or specific accelerators, to have them stay away from the normal corporate structures, because that is something that is not necessarily fostering innovation and innovation that you need. So and I support that, because you do need the space, you do need the freedom to remain open, to remain untied towards, HR processes or financial processes, budgets, what have you. Of course, you need some guardrails around what you're doing, but there's a benefit in sort of separating that out from the normal, call it, corporate structures.
This idea of ring fencing innovation, putting the innovators in quarantine, makes a lot of sense in order to create that safe space. But then there's the challenge of reintegrating that work with the mainstream business.
That is true. That's where part of the magic is, right? Because what I have seen, we talked about failures before, but what I have seen is that, innovation drifting away from, too far away from the context where they were supposed to be applied. That is a problem. So to establish that connection between your separated innovation team and the rest of the corporation or the business unit that you are innovating for or working with, that is super important. So part of what I've done in sort of the settings that I've been in is to have, those anchor points, between your innovation teams and your corporate settings, in the terms of, again, test and learn, right? So that you may have your innovation happening in, I wouldn't say a silo, because that also have a negative connotation about it, but in somewhat of a separate environment, and then go back and test and learn, and then take those learnings and go away again and innovate, and then come back. So that dialectic play between the corporation and your innovation hub is super important, and also speaks to and requires, capabilities and understanding on both sides, both from the innovation hub, if you will, that, hey, we're not just innovating because it's fun to innovate. That's also part of it, but we're actually innovating with a purpose or for a purpose and a context that needs to be considered when we do our innovation. On the other hand, there also needs to be a realization and an understanding from a corporation that we allow an innovation team to work under different conditions than and processes that rest of the corporation may work under. So I think that mutual acknowledgement is important. And then I would actually like to take it one step further, because then what I have seen positively as well is that the reintegration of the innovation hub or innovation groups into a corporate setting may trigger or may spark a discussion in the corporation about, are we actually organized in a way in our corporation that is fostering and supporting an innovation culture, or do we have way too many processes and boundaries that is actually hindering the, I would say, natural innovation that is in all employees and all associates that you have in your corporation? Because I mean, it's not only the critical few or a few people who are good at innovating. All the associates in your corporation have ideas, have perspectives, and what I've seen in some cases is that you just need to create the environment, the space for that innovation culture to sort of bloom and to get to the surface. I think we have, unfortunately, a tendency or history of holding some of that down, holding some of our associates and employees, having them focus on, their yearly objectives or whatever it may be, are not giving them enough space to actually do something else, to focus on something else. That privilege have been associated mostly and so far to technology companies. I mean, we've all heard about, the Fridays or the afternoons or whatever it is, where companies give their associates some time to innovate or do fun stuff, right? But that typically happens only in technology companies or in companies with an already mature innovation culture, not necessarily in more mature corporate settings.
Yeah, it's the abundance versus scarcity mindset. Google can assume that it has an abundance of revenue and therefore time, and can afford to invest in those speculative ideas. The downside of a scarcity mindset is that it can be self-reinforcing. It can be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
True.
How would you distill all of this experience into, say, 2 or 3 lessons for our listeners?
I've been thinking about how to respond to that. I mean, you kind of touch upon it before, the scarcity, the abundance. I mean, there are some keywords, some values that I think is valid as one move forward in life and with innovation and accelerators and these kinds of things, that goes along the lines of what is driving you. Are you driven by fear? Fear of your competitors being faster than you, fear of competition, fear of something else, or are you driven by the desire to bring something new to the world? There is a piece here that I think is important for all of us to remember. We're typically driven by 2 things, either fear, as I said, or by love. Love meaning the desire to, like I said before, improve or enrich or enhance what is already available, what is out there for the world or to the world, if you know what I mean. The things that I have learned on my journey so far, and my journey is far from over, of course, is that stick to your core values in whatever setting you get into. Like I said before, it does not really matter that much to me whether I'm in a publicly traded company or a family-owned business. The challenges are the same. Your intuition for what needs to be done is the same. The setting might be different. The industry might be different. The people you work with might be different. You gotta follow your gut feelings, your intuition, and have this piece of passion and curiosity that I talked about earlier that I'm gifted with. With that, I think you can drive, tremendous results and very satisfying results, both for yourself as well as for the companies and the clients and the customers and the colleagues that you work with.
We've touched on this already, but how do you think the pandemic might affect corporations in the long term?
I think what we've learned during the pandemic is that it is possible to change quickly, to adapt quicker to new situations than we anticipated. I'm not sure many companies had planned for a pandemic like this one, how we would collaborate, what would happen, how to respond, all these kinds of things that this pandemic have forced us to do. What we've learned is that our ability to adjust, to readjust, and to adapt is maybe more key now than it has ever been. And when you look at it from a digital standpoint, I mean, we've all learned that you may not necessarily need to travel to collaborate or to innovate or to do things that you thought required a face-to-face interaction. Don't get me wrong, there's still a social aspect that is not to be underestimated, but we can actually, as human beings, we can get a lot done remotely and virtual. So I think that's probably the biggest change that I've seen. And having said that, I'm still missing some innovation here, because when we are working virtually, what I would love to see much more of is, for instance, the conversation you and I have right now. I could be sort of empowered, and so could you, with input to our conversation from artificial intelligence or trigger points or references from, real time as you and I are speaking about points we should pick up or could pick up, topics we could discuss, or perspectives on topics that we are discussing. Could be, if we had video, your facial expression. What does that tell me as I'm speaking? Am I speaking too fast? Am I boring you? I mean, what we can also learn from this pandemic and this conversion to the virtual settings is that there is more we can do here. We can use technology to more than just doing video conferences and Teams meetings and Zoom meetings and what have you all the time. There's a layer we can add to it. In my mind, it's super interesting as the next step, wherever that next step takes us, right?
Yeah, I love that idea of applying augmented reality to a conversation. When you were talking about reintegration, I was thinking about Geoffrey Moore's book, Zone to Win, and the process that he describes for using milestones in an internal innovation project as moments to reflect on and decide whether to continue investing, in a metaphor drawn from VC. And it would have been amazing if, for our listeners, that book had popped up with a hyperlink to the book's page and to Geoffrey Moore's description of the zones. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Hypertext in real time in video and audio.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. Why not? It is remarkable, I think, the extent to which humans have adapted to the new reality. We ran a program earlier in the year, and then we started a new one sort of 4 months later. And the difference in how people were using the tools at their disposal and how they were learning to collaborate with one another was really striking. Even just in that period of 20 weeks, people had really raised their game. And it makes you realize just what ingenious chimpanzees we are.
Exactly. I mean, let me try and give you another example, because, I used to work in the veterinary industry.
Speaking of chimpanzees.
Yeah, exactly. You triggered me, right? But point there is that visiting your vet used to be, or is, a physical face-to-face sort of interaction, right? And we thought that could only happen in one way, before the pandemic, right? You go into the veterinary clinic, the interaction and all these kinds of things happen. However, what we have learned, and not only why the veterinary industry is booming right now, but what we have learned is that there are other ways to engage or interact with a veterinarian. Things like video consulting. Yes, it sounds very mundane and a commodity piece, but that was not as developed before the pandemic as it is right now. It's a critical point or part of the veterinary process nowadays. The other piece I alluded to, namely that industry is booming right now, is obviously just like the home improvement industry that I'm in right now is booming, is that all of us are sitting at home now, which makes us maybe want to have a companion to be around us, to quotation mark help us out in sort of the loneliness we may have in our home offices, or the missing social interaction with other humans that triggers this desire to maybe have a companion pet of some sort. Just like home improvements, right? If you're working from home, you obviously spend more time at home, and you may want to have more daylight or more fresh air, or a nice painting or something beautiful to look at, or an environment to work in that is different from what you normally have, because you're simply spending more time at home.
Yeah.
Right. So there are industries right now that are booming because of the pandemic. Yeah, it is what it is. But I mean, it's just interesting to see what this pandemic does to the human race, to how we think, to how we collaborate, what values suddenly sort of gets back to our lives. To me, it's been also a question about, how thankful I should be and how grateful I should be for things that were sort of diluted or were, maybe too far away before the pandemic. So I think the pandemic has sort of reignited or brought us maybe back to some of the core values that may have been forgotten a little bit over time.
I think that's true. I think I know for me personally, it's been an incredibly grounding experience, and I've actually really enjoyed spending so much more time with my family and working from home and having those interactions instead of with colleagues, with my husband and my kids. Another guest called it the Great Acceleration. A lot of digitization that had been planned suddenly absolutely had to happen on a deadline. So again, the pressure of necessity created a ton of innovation around moving these platforms online.
That is one of the things that oftentimes triggers innovation. That is necessity. You're forced to think differently. You're forced to work differently. You're forced to use the tools you have available, maybe in a new or a different way than what you've normally done. And I mean, sometimes crisis is not a bad thing, because sometimes it forces us to, like I said before, view things differently or to come up with new ways of doing things, right?
Jesper, you've been working so hard for such a long time. How do you personally avoid burnout?
I have a strong backbone, my family, the time I spent when not necessarily working. I'm probably working 24 hours a day, but I mean, the perspectives, the conversations, the life I have with other people is fueling me. And the second piece is that I'm ignited by work. I'm ignited by my passion and my curiosity that seems like an eternal flame or eternal fuel that is just driving me forward. But don't get me wrong, I get tired. I do get times where now I need a break or what have you, for sure. But it's, I would say, by design, because it's something that I know is good for me. And I know it's helping me keep my motivation, keep my passion, keep my drive there. It's about realizing and acknowledging the things that matters and works for you in your life, right? And the moment you get to the point, maybe it's something about age. I can say that I'm a bit older now, but I think you get to a point where you know your trigger points.
Yep.
You know what motivates you. You know when to maybe stop or slow down, or when you can scale up. I think that experience that you build up over time is, at least in my case, helping me not to burn out.
I think there's a huge advantage to being at our end of our career trajectories, where you have this enormous database to use for pattern recognition. You can look back on all of these scenarios and things that you tried in the past and what worked and what didn't. And it's wonderful to have that repository of experience and be able to apply those much more nuanced analytical skills to these situations.
And what if that catalog information you and I have, or experiences that we have, what if it was possible to push those forward to the younger generations? I mean, that is per definition what happens when we teach children and younger people. We pass on information, we pass on experiences, what have you. But what if we could find ways to, personalize some of those experiences so that they don't have to wait, 10, 15, 20 years into their working life before they know things that you and I may know about ourselves? What if they could get to those points much earlier in their career, in their life? That could be fantastic, couldn't it?
Yeah, no, I think of that as a pretty explicit goal of my coaching and mentoring practice is I have all of these burn scars so you don't have to.
No, the same here.
What is the best way for our listeners to connect with you or follow your work?
I would appreciate one-to-one interactions or connections. I do, use social media and use them and what have you. And I do share pieces of work and experiences or stories and what have you on different kinds of social medias. But what I enjoy the most is more personalized settings, like what you and I have right here. It's not as superficial or impersonal as if you and I were chatting over, LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that. We could still do that. We could probably get so and so far, but I appreciate the one-to-one connection. It may be very old school, but hey, why not?
It's very high bandwidth information exchange, and that's great for those of us with the shorter attention span, shall we say. What does the future look like for you personally? You've just taken on this new gig. What's exciting to you about it?
I really enjoy moving a company and the mindsets in a company like Velux. I think I said earlier, it's a much smaller setting, much smaller company than, some of the companies that I worked in before. I'm actually doing a lot of things on the side. I'm supporting and advising younger startups both in the Bay Area as well as in LA, and also actually in Eastern Europe. And I enjoy fueling and injecting ideas into younger generations or people who want to move forward with an idea that may and may not know exactly, where and how to go. So I spent some time on that. I spent time with PEs or private equity, helping them with some of their portfolio companies to think about what could digital transformation look like in some of their portfolio companies. So helping them with that is also something that I enjoy. And then I work with some super large companies as well, giving them some ideas on what innovation could look like. And also I spent actually quite some time also connecting people, because during my career, I've gotten to know a lot of different people, all kinds of places, all kinds of industries. So when people reach out to me with an idea or with, in fact, many headhunters are also reaching out to me and say, hey, do you know somebody who fit this role or could help out here? So I actually do a lot of things on the side. Again, it's something that I enjoy helping others. I enjoy giving to society, giving to other people and to share some of my learnings. And again, it sort of refuels also my curiosity, because I get to learn then again other people, new things, new innovators. And actually, since I came back to Europe here, I've started to look into Eastern Europe, which was not that much on my radar screen when I was on the West Coast, US West Coast. And there's so much going on there. And I kind of, enjoy discovering all these kinds of things that are coming out and, helping them to get to their next levels and get them introduced to, some people in the US or other parts of the world to test out some things, because your geo location should not be a hindrance for you to get your product or your idea out there. So I do so much more than just help out.
That gives our listeners a really good idea of the kinds of things they should reach out to you for, which is great. Okay, I'm going to grant you a daydream now. The most positive, amazing outcome for the tech industry or for our economy that you can imagine for the next 5 to 10 years? What does the world look like?
That is an awesome question, Rachel. I think if we could remove some of the friction that exists today, if we could somehow promote, we're already doing, a lot of work in the STEM area and, genders and diversity, all these kinds of, I think if we could support and ignite the innovation of more people, I think that would be wonderful. And I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but I know every single one of us, we do have ideas, we do have dreams, we do have perspectives on things. And if we can somehow transform that into something useful that ties us together more than separates us, if we could get to that point within the next 5 to 10 years. So I know it's a little bit unconcrete or not super concrete, but for me, innovation is about mindsets more than a concrete service or a concrete product. If we can move mindsets, that will bring our generation and the world to the next level.
That sounds like a fantastic future. I want to live there. But Jesper, thank you for talking to our audience and sharing your insights from your distinguished career. It's been a great pleasure.
Anytime. Thank you so much for inviting me.
This has been Alchemist X, Innovators Inside. If you enjoy our show, we'd be grateful if you could give us a rating or comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. You can find the transcript of this conversation, plus links to whatever books, articles, TV shows, and apps we talked about on alchemistaccelerator.com/podcasts. If you'd like to chat more about our corporate programs for spin-ins and spin-outs, email us at innovators@alchemistaccelerator.com. We love hearing from you, so stay connected by following Alchemist X on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Until next time, this has been Alchemist X, Innovators Inside.